With little explanation, Peter then takes the prince on another long journey, first to Jerusalem, then Bethlehem, the River Jordan, and cavalry help, instructing him there about the crucifixion, harrowing of hell, resurrection, and ascension. While one might expect this journey back into biblical history to lead to a baptism at the site of Jesus' own baptism, that expectation is not fulfilled. When the prince indicates to Peter that he fears he's overstayed his welcome and needs to return to his own country, praying for christening at Peter's hands, a christening that is, after all, the point of the whole journey, Peter refuses to baptize him, directing him to return home withouten Christendom, so that he can be sponsored by the Magdalene, Lazarus, and Martha, and baptized by the Bishop of Marseille. The prince is thus sent back to his starting point to receive the very gift that motivated him to leave home. And the return trip is literally a recuperation, since, landing again on the island where his wife's body was deposed, he finds a little child playing on the shore, and ultimately he finds his revived wife and mother. The Queen now reports that while the prince has been touring the Holy Land with Peter, she herself has been taken on exactly the same journey, though in a mystical way, to Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Jordan by Mary Magdalene. The reunited family travels home, is met by Saracens and Jews, and Mary Magdalene, Martha, Lazarus, and the bishop. The three members of the royal family are finally christened, followed by the children and all the women, until all that land was Christian and all the folk therein. The point of this complex narration is puzzling in multiple ways. Why leave home to be christened, only to have that goal repeatedly shifted and deferred and ultimately set back to the point of departure? In part, the object seems to be a recapitulation of history through a geographical movement. From Western Europe back to Rome and then back to the Holy Land, we move back in time to the originary Christian moment, and in reverse through the translatio imperii associated with Christianity's spread. But this does not quite explain the temporality in which the prince's and the queen's conversions are first achieved in Marseille, but then deferred by the journey to Rome, the queen's death, the travels in the Holy Land, the queen's revival, and the return home, at which point only does the long ago achieved conversion lead to the institutional marking of conversion, baptism. Already achieved, the conversion is, across long expanses of time and space, held in suspense, not yet susceptible to full achievement. And this is the temporal mode that I'm calling the already, not yet. This temporality, which characterizes a number of other medieval texts as well, bears, I think, at least some relation to the messianic time. Giorgio Agamben, in The Time That Remains, reads out of Paul's letter to Romans. And I'm just going to suggest briefly a relationship between the temporality of the narrative that I've just described and Agamben's very complicated formulations, which I'm not going to do justice to, and we can try to figure out more about them in a couple minutes. I'm almost done. Here, Agamben considers the urgent temporality that Paul sees as characterizing his own moment, a moment after the end of chronological time, an end marked by Christ's resurrection, but before the institution of the world to come, the eternality to follow on the second coming or last judgment. Agamben works through several formulations to make sense of Paul's articulation of this time as both outside chronology and yet not timeless or eternal. This is the paradox that Agamben sees in Paul and tries to figure out as what he calls Paul's messianic time. Thus he reads this temporality in Paul as a time of remainder or remnant, literally the time that remains over and above a completed chronological time that despite its fulfillment has not yet given way to eternity. He reads messianic time too via the linguist Gustave Guillaume's idea of operational time, the time the mind takes to realize a time image. And Agamben suggests that messianic time is the time that time takes to come to an end, or more precisely, the the time we take to bring to an end to achieve our representation of time. This is a time of suspension, characterized by both typology and recapitulation. In typology, a completed past is reactivated, that is, it is made incomplete, and an incomplete present is fulfilled or completed. In recapitulation, everything from a now completed chronological time can be gathered up into a timeless fullness in preparation for the end. And I think here, again, of the work done by that double journey from Marseille to Rome to Jerusalem, Bethlehem, the Jordan River, and then back again. Something like this recapitulation of the whole history of the Christian enterprise. Finally, with Agamben, we might also think messianic time as a temporal constellation blasted out of chronology, time in the process of being seized, coming to an end but not ended. And here Agamben connects Paul explicitly to Walter Benjamin's Jetztzeit, which Agamben suggests owes a specific debt to Paul. How precisely, though, does messianic time, urgent in Paul's moment, when the resurrection is a living memory and the end time an imminent coming, maintain its urgency as time passes, as chronological time seems, in fact, to stretch on and on and on? And I think that question is a crucial one for much of the history of Christianity, but certainly in the Middle Ages. What does one do with formulations that in Paul come out of the experience of being in that immediate early Christian moment when it's been a millennium since that moment? The question's too big for me to take on fully today, but one thing both Agamben and Benjamin seem to suggest is that the possibility of an experience of messianic time exists at any moment, despite the real frustrations of waiting, of living on in a tedium of mundane chronology. My provisional conclusion for today, then, is that a certain medieval representation and experience of conversion might act to reactivate messianic time, to revivify Christianity's investment in both the already of the resurrection with its suspension of chronology and the not yet of eternity. Might Pauline life, the life of the convert, and perhaps the life of the Christian altogether be then most amply conceived as the life of a decision always already made, paradoxically merged with an unending deferral, a yet and yet and yet, that adds up to a time of the already not yet.
The floor is now open for questions and comments. I have a question of my own, actually. You were talking about the difference between conversion and baptism. I was wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit more about that.
And it's kind of, I mean, all of this is complicated by the fact that, of course, when we say Christianity, we're meaning a whole bunch of different things. So in the Middle Ages, accounts of conversion, right, and experiences of conversion always have to be followed up by an institutional marking of that, which is baptism. In Augustine's moment, it's complicated because there isn't infant baptism yet that's fully theologically necessary, and so someone like Monica can defer baptizing Augustine even as a believing Christian. But in the medieval configuration of Christianity, right, all Christians are baptized at birth, so when a pagan or a Saracen or a Jew in these texts converts, the baptism has to be represented. Or if it's not represented, it's assumed as part of the language of conversion when people talk about christening, right? The christening means the institutional marking of the conversion by baptism.